If you have a straight ramp, which is leading up to the Great Pyramid, if it's going to carry blocks right up to what will be the top of the Great Pyramid, no gang of workers can haul a 20-ton block.
When most people think about the Great Pyramid of Giza, they imagine one of the most iconic monuments in human history. It is a structure that has stood for more than 4,000 years and is often described as the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian achievement. The common story, repeated in classrooms, museums, and documentaries, is that Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, built the pyramid around 2500 BCE. According to this version of history, tens of thousands of workers carved, dragged, and stacked over 2 million limestone blocks into position using copper tools, ropes, and wooden sleds. The official timeline says it took just over 2 decades to complete.
That the stones used in building the Great Pyramid came from Torah, and Torah is a 25 mile to the east.
It is a narrative many of us grew up with. Yet, over the past 3 decades, some researchers and authors have challenged this version of events. Among the most prominent is Graham Hancock, a British writer and journalist. Hancock is not an Egyptologist or a trained archaeologist, but he has spent much of his career asking difficult questions about ancient history. His work focuses on the possibility that human civilization is older and more complex than we usually believe.
I think we're looking again at a lost technology. And it was this ancient apocalypse 12,800 years ago that wiped that.
Hancock's journey into this subject did not begin in a university or a dig site, but in journalism. He worked for newspapers and magazines, including The Economist, before turning his attention in the 1990s to ancient history and archaeology. While covering a story on Ethiopia in the late 1980s, he became fascinated by claims about the Ark of the Covenant being housed there. That investigation sparked a broader interest in how myth, legend, and archaeology might connect. By the time he published his first widely read book on the subject, Fingerprints of the Gods, in 1995, Hancock had already developed a reputation for going against the grain. In his books, articles, and television appearances, Hancock raises questions that sit uncomfortably with mainstream scholarship. For example, why do some ancient structures around the world show advanced levels of engineering and astronomy? Why do myths from different continents contain recurring themes of floods, lost lands, and gods who brought knowledge to humans? And perhaps most controversially, why does archaeology often resist exploring alternative interpretations? Critics argue that his ideas are speculative, misleading, and not grounded in evidence. Many professional archaeologists and historians label his work as pseudoscience, claiming it cherry-picks data and ignores the context of established research. Yet at the same time, Hancock has gained a massive global audience. His books have sold millions of copies, and his television appearances and documentary series have reached audiences who might not otherwise have an interest in ancient history. One reason Hancock resonates with so many people is his background. Because he is not part of the academic establishment, he positions himself as an outsider who asks questions without being tied to institutional careers or reputations. In his own words, he is not claiming to have all the answers. Instead, he says he is pointing out contradictions and gaps in the official story. For many readers and viewers, that approach feels refreshing compared to the rigid certainty often projected by mainstream history. A key feature of Hancock's method is that it is multidisciplinary. Instead of relying only on archaeology, he draws from geology, astronomy, mythology, and comparative religion. He travels extensively, visiting sites across the globe, from ancient temples in Central America and Indonesia to stone monuments in Turkey and underwater ruins in Japan. His work often compares these locations, highlighting patterns he believes point to a shared source of knowledge. For example, he frequently explores the idea that many ancient cultures seem to possess a deep understanding of the stars and deliberately align their monuments with celestial events. For supporters, this wide perspective is one of his strengths. They argue that too often, specialists focus narrowly on their fields and miss broader connections. For critics, however, this approach is one of his weaknesses, because they say it allows him to make sweeping generalizations without the rigor of academic testing. Whether one agrees with him or not, there is no denying that Hancock has forced conversations about history into the public sphere in ways few others have. When it comes to the Great Pyramid, Hancock is especially skeptical of the official explanation. He points out that for such a supposedly significant royal tomb, there is a remarkable absence of inscriptions, carvings, or decorations inside. Unlike other pharaonic tombs, which are filled with hieroglyphs, prayers, and funerary texts, the Great Pyramid is mostly silent. The only direct link to Khufu is a series of quarry marks discovered in 1837 by Colonel Howard Vyse in hidden chambers above the King's Chamber. Some researchers, Hancock included, have questioned the authenticity of these markings, pointing out inconsistencies in Vyse's records and the circumstances of the discovery. This is where Hancock's broader perspective comes in. Instead of accepting the pyramid solely as a tomb, he suggests that it could be much older, inherited by the ancient Egyptians rather than constructed by them. According to this view, the pyramid may have served other purposes, possibly astronomical or scientific, and its origins may lie with a civilization that predates the dynastic Egyptians. It is important to stress that these ideas are not accepted by mainstream archaeology. Egyptologists maintain that the evidence points clearly to the pyramid being built during Khufu's reign, and that alternative theories often rely on misinterpretations or selective use of data. Yet for many people, the scale of the Great Pyramid, combined with the unanswered questions about its construction, keeps the debate alive. Hancock's critics also argue that his popularity is partly due to how he frames the academic establishment. By presenting archaeologists as gatekeepers who are resistant to new ideas, he positions himself as a challenger to authority. This narrative of the lone investigator against powerful institutions appeals to audiences who are suspicious of official stories. At the same time, it frustrates professionals who believe that their methods are rigorous and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Nevertheless, Hancock's work has had an undeniable impact. Television networks, streaming services, and publishers continue to give him platforms, and public interest in ancient mysteries has only grown. Even when his claims are disputed, they often force experts to explain their positions more clearly, which indirectly strengthens public engagement with history. Part of Hancock's influence also comes from his style of storytelling. He does not just present data, he tells a narrative. He takes readers and viewers on journeys to exotic locations, introduces them to intriguing characters, and poses questions that are simple but profound. What if our ancestors were more advanced than we think? What if monuments like the pyramids carry messages from a forgotten past? What if our understanding of history is only half the story? The Great Pyramid of Giza is often described as the most remarkable structure of the ancient world. It is the largest and oldest of the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau, and unlike many monuments from antiquity, it still stands in a form that is almost complete. For centuries it has been studied, measured, and written about, yet its origins and construction continue to raise questions that are not easy to answer. The mainstream explanation is that the pyramid was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu around 2500 BCE. The accepted view holds that it took a workforce of tens of thousands about 2 decades to complete the project. In that time, roughly 2.3 million limestone blocks were quarried, transported, and assembled into a structure that originally rose to about 146 meters in height. This official version has been the foundation of textbooks and museums for generations. Still, some researchers, writers, and engineers have pointed to unresolved issues within this explanation. One of the most common questions is the lack of inscriptions inside the pyramid. In almost all other royal tombs of Egypt, hieroglyphs and religious texts cover the walls. They include prayers, spells, and dedications meant to protect the pharaoh in the afterlife. Yet the Great Pyramid is bare on the inside. There are no inscriptions, no painted walls, and no obvious religious symbolism. The only object inside is a plain granite box in what is called the King's Chamber. No mummy was ever discovered there, nor were there burial goods, as one would expect from a royal tomb. The single piece of evidence linking the pyramid to Khufu is a set of markings discovered in 1837 by Colonel Howard Vicey, a British explorer. While blasting his way into hidden chambers above the King's Chamber, Vicey reported finding quarry marks that contained Khufu's name. For mainstream Egyptologists, this was the key that confirmed the pyramid's builder. However, alternative researchers have raised doubts. They argue that Vicey had strong incentives to make a discovery that would cement his reputation, and that inconsistencies in his notes cast suspicion on whether the marks were genuine. No other independent evidence exists that directly connects Khufu to the Great Pyramid. Beyond the question of who built it is the issue of how it was constructed. The pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north, deviating by only a fraction of a degree. Achieving this kind of precision would be challenging even with modern surveying instruments, yet the official account attributes it to copper tools and sighting methods using the stars. The base of the pyramid is equally astonishing. It covers over 13 acres of land and is level to within a few centimeters. For a structure of such scale, maintaining that degree of accuracy would be difficult even today. Another feature that continues to draw attention is the precision with which the stones are fitted together. Many of the limestone blocks and granite stones are joined so tightly that in some places it is said a razor blade cannot fit between them. Some blocks interlock at angles or curves, which suggests advanced planning and craftsmanship. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate this work using replicas of ancient tools. The results generally show that while it is possible to shape stone with copper chisels and pounding stones, the process is extremely slow and not consistent enough to produce the large-scale precision seen in the pyramid. The weight of the blocks is also a challenge. While many of the limestone blocks weigh between 2 and 3 tons, some of the granite stones used in the King's Chamber and other internal structures weigh up to 70 or 80 tons. These were quarried in Aswan, about 800 kilometers to the south. The accepted theory is that the stones were floated on barges along the Nile and then dragged across land using sleds and ropes. But transporting such heavy loads, lifting them, and placing them with exact precision, all without iron tools, wheels, or modern cranes, raises understandable doubts. The most widely discussed explanation for how the pyramid was assembled is the ramp theory. According to this view, large ramps were built to haul the stones into place as the pyramid rose. Some suggest a straight ramp, while others propose a spiral ramp around the pyramid's exterior. However, critics of the ramp theory point out that the scale of such a ramp would have required enormous amounts of additional material, potentially more than the pyramid itself. If such ramps existed, they have left little to no archaeological trace. Inside the pyramid, the architecture becomes even more puzzling. The Grand Gallery, a steep and narrow passageway leading to the King's Chamber, is built with corbelled walls that rise to a height of over 8 meters. Its design is highly unusual and seems to serve more than just a functional purpose. The King's Chamber itself is roofed with massive granite beams, each weighing dozens of tons. Above it are 5 relieving chambers designed to distribute the weight. These chambers also contain some of the markings attributed to Khufu. The geometry of the pyramid has also drawn attention. Some researchers argue that the proportions of its height and base encode mathematical constants such as pi and the golden ratio. Others point out that it reflects astronomical knowledge, including alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and even the curvature of the Earth. While mainstream scholars argue that some of these observations may be coincidences or overinterpretations, they remain central to debates about the pyramid's purpose. One of the key questions is why the pyramid represents such a leap in quality compared to later pyramids. Many of the structures built after Khufu's reign are poorly constructed and have collapsed into rubble. If the Great Pyramid was the product of gradual development, it seems strange that later generations did not match or surpass its engineering achievements. Alternative theories suggest that the Great Pyramid was either inherited from an earlier culture or built using knowledge that was later lost. At the edge of the Giza Plateau stands not only the pyramids but also the Great Sphinx, a monument just as mysterious in its own way. The Sphinx is carved directly out of the bedrock, representing a lion's body with a hidden head, and it has fascinated visitors for thousands of years. Mainstream archaeology places its construction around 2500 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, who is often linked to the second largest pyramid at Giza. According to this traditional view, the Sphinx was built as part of his funerary complex, serving as a guardian figure. However, not everyone agrees with that dating. In the early 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch from Boston University studied the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure. He concluded that the vertical fissures and weathering could not have been caused by wind and sand alone, which is the common explanation, but were instead the result of prolonged rainfall. This presented a major problem because the Giza Plateau has been an arid desert for thousands of years. The last time the region experienced heavy, sustained rainfall was at the end of the last ice age, roughly between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago. If Schoch's analysis is correct, it would mean the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. Such a conclusion implies that there was already a highly organized culture capable of large-scale stone carving long before the rise of pharaonic civilization. Mainstream Egyptologists strongly dispute this claim, arguing that the dating of the Sphinx to Khafre's time is supported by archaeological context, style, and the layout of the Giza complex. Nevertheless, Schoch's geological observations have remained difficult to dismiss completely. This alternative dating of the Sphinx has been linked by writers like Graham Hancock to a much larger theory about lost civilizations. Hancock suggests that both the Sphinx and the pyramids may be remnants of a culture that existed long before 2500 BCE, perhaps as far back as 10,500 BCE. This was a time when Earth was undergoing dramatic climatic changes at the end of the last ice age. Some scientists support the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which proposes that a comet or fragments of a comet struck the planet around 12,800 years ago, causing sudden cooling, massive flooding, and widespread disruption to human populations. If such an event occurred, it could explain why evidence of early advanced cultures might have been wiped out, leaving only a few monumental traces behind. Supporters of this view also point to astronomy. The three pyramids of Giza are not aligned in a straight line, but are slightly offset. In the 1980s and 1990s, researcher Robert Bauval proposed the Orion correlation theory, which argues that the layout of the pyramid mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt. Using astronomical calculations, Bauval suggested that this alignment corresponds not to the sky of 2500 BC, but to how Orion's belt appeared around 10,500 BCE. This date matches closely with Schoch's proposed geological dating of the Sphinx. Hancock and others see this as more than coincidence, arguing that the monuments were deliberately aligned to create a kind of star map on the ground, encoding knowledge of the heavens for future generations. The idea that ancient monuments reflect star patterns is not unique to Giza. Across the world, sites such as Teotihuacan in Mexico, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey have been studied for their astronomical alignments. Some researchers believe these patterns suggest a shared knowledge or a cultural memory passed down through different societies. Critics caution that humans are naturally good at finding patterns, and alignments may be coincidental rather than deliberate. Still, the consistency of these claims across cultures continues to generate interest. Hancock takes the argument further by suggesting that the builders of the pyramids and the Sphinx were not the dynastic Egyptians themselves, but survivors of an earlier advanced civilization. He proposes that when this civilization collapsed during a global catastrophe, its survivors carried fragments of their knowledge to different parts of the world, influencing later cultures. According to this theory, the Great Pyramid was not a tomb at all but a kind of time capsule, designed to endure through millennia and transmit knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and the dimensions of the Earth. This idea remains highly controversial. Archaeologists argue that there is no solid evidence of such a lost civilization, and that the achievements of the Egyptians can be explained through gradual development of technology, organization, and culture. Nonetheless, the theory appeals to many people because it provides a framework for understanding anomalies that otherwise remain puzzling. It also taps into a wider human fascination with the possibility of forgotten chapters in history. Another dimension to the debate is the question of hidden chambers and unexplored spaces within the pyramid itself. In 1993, an engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink used a robot to explore narrow shafts inside the Great Pyramid. His robot discovered a small limestone door with copper fittings deep within one of the shafts, sparking worldwide curiosity. However, after this discovery, Gantenbrink was denied further access, and the exploration was taken over by the Egyptian authorities. This led to accusations that information was being withheld, fueling speculation that there might be more secrets inside the pyramid. In 2017, scientists used a technique called muon tomography, which involves tracking cosmic particles as they pass through stone, to scan the pyramid. They reported finding a large hidden void above the Grand Gallery, potentially the size of an aeroplane. The purpose of this void is unknown, and no further exploration has been carried out to reveal its contents. For alternative researchers, this is further evidence that the pyramid may still hold secrets that could challenge our understanding of history. For mainstream Egyptologists, it is an intriguing anomaly, but not proof of anything beyond architectural design. These discoveries feed into a broader perception that the official story of ancient Egypt is tightly controlled. Figures like Zahi Hawass, the former head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, have often been accused of resisting alternative research and restricting access to new findings. From the perspective of critics like Hancock, this looks like a deliberate cover-up to protect established narratives. From the perspective of Egyptologists, it is a matter of protecting heritage from sensational claims and ensuring that research meets proper scientific standards. The debate over the pyramids, the Sphinx, and lost civilizations highlights the tension between mainstream scholarship and alternative theories. On one side, professional archaeologists argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that history should be based on material remains that can be dated and verified. On the other side, writers like Hancock argue that anomalies, patterns, and unexplained features point to gaps in the official story that should not be ignored. What is clear is that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx continue to inspire curiosity and debate far beyond academic circles. They stand as physical reminders of human ingenuity, but also as puzzles that have not been fully solved. Whether they are monuments of Old Kingdom Egypt or relics of a lost civilization, they invite us to reflect on how much of our past may still lie hidden. For Hancock, the message is that we should not assume our civilization is the first or the most advanced to exist. He suggests that the pyramids and other ancient monuments are deliberate messages left behind by earlier cultures, urging us to remember that history is not as simple as the textbooks suggest. Even if one does not accept his conclusions, the questions he raises challenge us to look at the past with fresh eyes. In the end, the story of the pyramids and the Sphinx may be less about definitive answers and more about the ongoing search for understanding. Whether through geology, astronomy, archaeology, or alternative theories, each new discovery reminds us that the past is not fixed, but is constantly being reinterpreted as new evidence emerges. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of these monuments, not only what they reveal about the people who built them, but how they continue to spark inquiry thousands of years later.